I was at an event in Alabama, and this couple pulls in the airport to pick me up. I get to know them. I say, "What's your name?" Rick and Charlotte. They got this thick Alabama accent. And I'm just like, "Tell me about yourself." And they're like, "Man, we worked our whole life." Rick's like, "I worked my whole life so that we could retire and cruise the world." And I was like, "Well, how's that going for you?" And he's like, "Todd, it was our first day of retirement on our first cruise on the first day." He says, "I'm sitting by the pool with my wife reading a book, and I look up, and in the pool is a man floating." I say, "Charlotte!" He says, "I jump in the pool. I pull the guy over. He'd been dead for 20 minutes. I start resuscitation. It didn't matter. His wife's on social media, has no idea what's going on. I'm sitting by a dead man by a pool on the first day of retirement, and I look up and I say to Charlotte, "Charlotte, is this what we gave our life for? People dying while we tan?" He said, "I'm 61 years old, and the vast amount of my life, I've been unsatisfied." And I just remembered that. I was like, oh my gosh, the vast amount of people, pretty much every friend you have lives life unsatisfied. Why? They live for the next relationship. They live for the next internship. They live for the next thing to buy. And they are not living for their intended purpose, and so they live unsatisfied. Think about everything that has a warning label on it that we buy. I mean, you might not know this, but on the Apple website, it says, "Do not eat the iPhone." I'm like, why would someone tried to use the iPhone for not its intended purpose? Apple gets sued, and now on their website, there's a warning label. On the side of a wheelbarrow, it says, "Not intended for highway use." I bought a dishwasher. It gets installed. I open the dishwasher. Inside the dishwasher, a sticker. "Warning, do not let kids play inside." I'm like, what is going on? If our life had a warning label on it, what would it say? Do not live for self. It will not satisfy. It will not work. Do not live for self. It will not satisfy. It will not work. Yet what do I do every day when I wake up? It might. It might. All my friends are doing it. My parents did it. My heart's telling me to do it. And so guess what? I want to do it. If you want to know your intended purpose, you got to ask the person who created you. The person who created you. That's how you know. And what does he say? Well, he says it right here in Colossians 1:16. All things were created by him and for him. Who's the him? The him is Jesus. You were created for a person. Well, man, that sounds kind of selfish, like Jesus creating me for him. Well, the question then becomes, well, who would you have wanted him to create you for? Your parents? No. Yourself? That doesn't work. Your friends? They would take advantage of you. But guess what? The all-loving, all-good, all-gracious, all-joyful God says the only way you are going to be truly satisfied is if you find your satisfaction in me. That's what he says. But we don't believe it. And so what happens? We just keep going back to our own self. Do you feel like you're depressed? Do you feel like you're empty? Do you feel like you have anxiety? Do you feel like you're codependent? Do you feel like you're addicted? Do you have identity issues? If those answers are yes, the odds are you're not living for your intended purpose. And so, when you don't live for your intended purpose, those things begin to emerge. What are you made for? All things were created by Jesus and for Jesus. You were created by him and for him, yet some in this room want nothing to do with him. And so, of course, you're going to feel depressed and empty and anxious. The person who's created you, made you, and you're only satisfied in him, you don't want anything to do with. We call that a tragedy. We call that in tragedy. You've got to begin to live for your intended purpose, which is to know him and to make him known. Think about this. God created us. He puts humanity in a garden to dwell. He wants to dwell with us that we might find satisfaction in him. Humanity sins. We're separated. The world religions of the day say, oh, you have to work your way back to God. God says there's no amount of work you can do to undo your sin. And so he says, I'm going to send Christ, my son, to earth, put on flesh, and he is going to dwell with humanity, live a perfect life, be crucified, be resurrected. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And so what happens? When I respond to the gospel, when I respond to this good news of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, and I believe, now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reconnected. I'm now, God dwells with me and in me. But I have to respond. I have to respond. I went to Africa. To go to Africa, you got to get like Hep A shot, polio shot, malaria boosters, malaria pills, typhoid shot. You have to get the yellow fever shot. So, I don't know if you know where to get a yellow fever shot, but I had to Google it. I Googled yellow fever shot, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and there's a clinic, rareshot.com, that it took me to. I'm like, is this a dispensary? I'm like, what is going on? I walk in, doctor brings me back to the office and sets me down, and he puts the yellow fever shot in me, and he's like, now you might feel sick for 24 hours. And I was like, well, why? He's like, well, this is what we call a live virus. And I was like, what's that mean? He's like, well, I'm putting a yellow fever in you that your body begins to fight it. You'll never get the real thing. You'll just have a little bit. I'm in the chair at the rareshot.com place. And I think, wow, he just summarized Christianity. Some of us have just enough Christian friends, Bible knowledge, Christian community, but we never get the real thing. We've never said, Lord, I want you to be my sole intended purpose. When I started dating my wife, we had a different level of commitment. Our friendship was this type of commitment. Then we started dating, and that was another type of commitment. And then I got down on the knee and proposed. That was another type of commitment. But there's been no commitment that matched me at the altar when I vowed to only love her. I mean, in that moment, I was saying no to all the other women. Literally, in that moment, women all over the world were weeping. But I wanted to make that sort of commitment with my wife. Some of you have a dating commitment to Jesus. Some of you have oh man, we're friends. Some of you, man, I'm engaged. He doesn't want any of that. If you want to live for your intended purpose, you have to be all in. That's the only way. 300 years after Christ died, there was a man named Augustine. He was a womanizer and a thief. And in his 30s, his friend shares Christ with him. In his 30s, his friend shares Christ with him. Here's what he says. I realized that I was almost 30 years old, and I was still floundering in the same emptiness because I was greedy to enjoy what the world had to offer, though it eluded me and wasted my strength. His friend shares the gospel. He responds to Jesus. He says, I want to live for my intended purpose, and that is for Christ. He spends the rest of his life writing over 80 books defending Christianity. And just before he dies, he says this, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. He's just quoting Colossians. All things are created for you and by you. He's just quoting Colossians. Freshman, University of Arkansas, Josh, joins a fraternity his freshman year. Smokes so much weed that by the time he gets initiated, they give him an award. Like they give him a pipe with the fraternity logo on the pipe. He said to me, it was 2 a.m. He had smoked a ton of weed. He asked his friend to go get him a Jimmy John's. He's in the fraternity house at 2 a.m. eating a Jimmy John's. And he says, Todd, I was eating it, and it tasted like cardboard. And at 2 a.m. in my fraternity house, I'm thinking, I'm so lost, I can't even enjoy a Jimmy John's. Like, that's how low I've gone. The simple thing as a sandwich, the joy has eluded me. 2 weeks later, one of his buddies that was involved in StuMo invites him to a Bible study, and Josh is changed. Why? He is living for his intended purpose. You were created for a person. The person is Jesus. But you were also created for a place. And the place is the new heavens and the new earth. This is not our home. If you're a Christ follower, this is not our home. We're created for a person, Jesus, and we're created for a place, the new heavens and new earth. Let me show you what you were created for. Let me show you the new heavens and new earth. If you look at Revelation, John the Apostle, who wrote the book of John, if you're familiar with that in the Bible, he wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He writes this vision of the end times. And literally Jesus, when John's like 80 years old and exiled in prison, he cracks the sky, and John like looks up, and he's like, hang on, and he's like writing it down. He's, hold on, oh my gosh. He's crying, he's worshiping, he's doing, oh my gosh, you know. And in Revelation, he shows what we were created for. Like, he gives us a peek behind the curtain. We get to see not only who we were created for, but what were we created for. And he watched this, Revelation 21. It's the longest chapter in the Bible about the new heavens and new earth. Here it is. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Wow, what happened to the first? The first passed away. There was no longer any sea, but a city. He calls it this new city, this new Jerusalem, is coming down out of heaven. Okay, and now he explains it. He's like, and I heard a loud voice from the throne. God was saying, now the dwelling of God is with men. In the garden, God wanted to dwell. We messed it up. Jesus came back to dwell. Now in the new city, the new heaven and new earth, it's the eternal dwelling. John says, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Think about that. All the pain, anxiety, gone. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. The older things have passed away. The newer things have come. And he keeps going. And he says this. He says, he carried me away in the spirit to a great high mountain, and he showed me this holy city coming down from heaven. This new heaven and new earth, it shone with glory of God, and the brilliance was like a precious jewel, jasper. And then he's like, man, he gets into detail. I mean, his pen's burning. It had a great high wall with 12 gates. Okay, so this thing's got like this new city that we're going to. If you're a Christ follower, it's got like 12 gates. That's kind of cool. Yeah, it's got 12 gates, and on the gates are the 12 tribes of Israel. So on the gates are the 12 tribes of Israel. There's 12 gates. What are the 12 tribes of Israel? Well, if you read Genesis, Jacob had 12 kids representing the nation of Israel and the people of God. So if you're a Christ follower, one day you're going to walk in through the gate called Gad or Zebulun or Reuben or Naphtali or Dan. Those are the sons of Jacob. Okay, that's weird. That's okay. There were 3 gates on one side and 3 gates on the other. This thing's like a cube. 3 on the south, 3 on the west. The wall, there's 12 steps leading up to the city. And the 12 steps are the names of the apostles. Peter, James, John, Bartholomew, Thomas. Again, representing all the people of God from the Old Testament and all the people of God from the New Testament. That's why there's 12 gates and 12 foundations. Okay, man, this is awesome. Keep going. Well, the angel who talked to me, he had a measuring rod. The city was laid out like a cube, a square. He measured the city. He found it was 12,000 stadia. I've never even been in something that big. 12,000 stadia. Are you joking? No, I'm not. What's a stadia? No, feel free to interrupt at any point. That's fine. What's a stadia? Well, Carol, the stadia, 8 stadia is a mile, okay? 8 stadia is a mile. Do the math. 8 stadia is a mile. So that's 1,500 miles, okay? 1,500 miles. It's 1,500 miles. That's here to D.C. This new city, the new heavens and new earth. It's coming down. It's a square. It's 1,500 miles high, and it's 1,500 miles long. This thing's a cube coming down, 12 gates, 12 foundations. It's coming down, here to D.C. It's the dwelling place that you and I are going to be. But attached to it is a new earth. So you're created for a person, Jesus, but you're also created for a place, the new heavens and new earth. And if you're a Christ follower, you're going to be coming and going for the new heaven and new earth. And redeemed city with redeemed people of God from all ages and all stages, living for your intended purpose, fully satisfied in Him. But it's got walls. What? It's got walls. What do you mean it's got walls? The walls are 144 cubits thick. What's a cubit? Carol? Well, I'll tell you what a cubit is. A cubit is from the end of your elbow to the end of your finger. That's a cubit. So basically, 144 cubits is about 200 feet. The walls are 200 feet thick. This new heaven and new earth coming down out of heaven. 12 foundations, 12 gates, 1,500, 200 feet thick. Oh my goodness. This is incredible. But guess what? We're going to be there. If you're a Christ follower, you're going to be there with a resurrected body. You're not just going to be a spirit person forever. You know, when I thought of heaven, I just thought, oh, our bodies are in the grave, but I'm just a spirit person somewhere in heaven. No, that's not what it is. Listen to what Paul says. I mean, I think if someone were to ask me what's heaven like, I'd have been like, oh, you know, like hovering on a cloud, playing a harp, listening to Maverick City. You know, like that's kind of what we do. One song all the time. No, we're going to be coming in and out of this city. We're going to be living on the earth. We're going to have bodies. What do you mean bodies? How is that possible? I mean, have you seen a body decayed? I have not. I've not seen a body decayed. Okay, so I heart you if you have. I haven't. Okay, how's it going to be? How are we going to get a resurrected body? Like, can you imagine being dead for 400 years? Well, fear not, little flock. Paul was asked this question as well. Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, the longest chapter in the Bible on our resurrected body. Someone may ask you, how are the dead? You're going to get a physical body? How is that even going to happen? Well, they were asking, like it's going to be gross and decayed. And Paul says, man, do you not understand? A gardener sees this every season. He puts a dirty seed in the ground. And up from this seed comes a beautiful flower. He says, your body's going to go into the ground. It's going to be sown perishable. But guess what? God gives a body, He's going to resurrect it to each his own. It's going to be the resurrection. It will come back imperishable. So, if you're a Christ follower, when you die, your spirit is immediately with the Lord, and your body goes into the ground. If you're not a Christ follower, you get exactly what you want, which is separation from God forever, rejecting His purpose and His satisfaction in His resurrected body, and you'll spend eternity in hell. But if you are a Christ follower, you will immediately with the Lord, your body goes in the grave. But then when that second coming of Christ happens, that's talked about in Revelation 20, your body that's in the grave will be resurrected, recreated, and reunited, and you will have your body forever in heaven, in the new city, going back and forth, helping to rule and reign with jobs and abilities. You were created for a person, Jesus. You were created for a place, the new heavens and new earth. But the vast amount of your friends are still trying to do it on their own. Oh, I'll find my purpose when I get married. I'll be satisfied then. I'll be satisfied when I make the 6 digits. I'll be satisfied when I just graduate and get that good job. No, you can kick the can down the road of living for yourself But I promise you, it will not satisfy. And all you have to do to see that is some of you just need to look at your parents. That's all you got to do. You go, wow, it doesn't. Living for self does not satisfy. C.S. Lewis says this, I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy. The most probable explanation is that I was made for another. Think about all the men and women from in the Old Testament who we have their stories. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Joshua, David, all the women. I mean, just think about that. What did they live for? What motivated them? Well, Hebrews in the New Testament, explaining what motivated them, says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. He didn't know where he was going. By faith, though, he stepped out, trusted the Lord, lived for God's purpose. He was a stranger, lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, his son and his grandson, who were heirs of the same promise. Well, why would he do this? Why would he step out? He didn't know it was 1,500 by 1,500 with 12 gates and 12 foundations and 200 walls. He didn't know that. He wasn't privileged to have Revelation 21 like we have on our phones. But he stepped out. He was looking forward to this new heaven and new earth whose architect were God. Not only Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all these people, they didn't know the specifics. They were still living by faith when they died. They didn't receive the promise. They only saw it. They didn't know the specifics. They were aliens. They were longing for a new and better country, a heavenly one. They didn't know it was called the New Jerusalem, new heaven and new earth. They didn't know the specifics. For we do not have an enduring city here. We're not created for this place. But we're looking forward to a city that is to come. Think of in this fallen world, the beauty we have that are just signposts. Glacier National Park, Grand Tetons, Pueblo. Like these are all just signposts. If those places are beautiful, imagine the new Jerusalem, the new heaven, the new earth, the recreated, resurrected, reunited body that you will get. Think about if you have great relationships now. Imagine if you're a Christ follower, in less than 70 years from now, you are going to be able to have a conversation with Adam. You're going to die. You're going to get to the new heavens and new earth, and you're going to be like, are you Adam? Yes. How bad did you feel? Pretty bad. You know, I've played that Apple moment in my mind, and I just wouldn't have done that. He's like, yeah, I get that a lot. Get that a lot. Are you Jonah? Yeah. You were like swallowed by a whale. Like, that is insane. That is insane. How dark was it? Oh, it was dark. It was dark. Are you Habakkuk? Yeah. I never read your book. I am so sorry. I was a nursing major. I had 0 time. He's like, it's 4 chapters. Still. But Harry Potter was incredible, okay? That's like 7 books. I mean, think about these relationships you're going to have. Think about these relationships. You were created for a person. The person is Jesus. Don't live for self. It won't satisfy. You were created for a place, the new heavens and new earth. One more C.S. Lewis quote. If you read history, you'll find that the Christians who did the most for the present world were just those who thought the most of the next. If you read history, you will find that Christians who did the most for the present world, they were living for their intended purpose, Jesus, and longing for their intended place, the new heavens and new earth. That's how they made their decisions. Do you know the number one way most of your friends are going to decide what to do after college? The number one way. Who pays the most? That is the number one factor that determines where they move and what zip code they live in. Do you know what God wants you to do? Not that. God, where do you want me to have the maximum impact for living for your purpose? I don't care where or what I do or what zip code it is or how close it is to mom and dad. My number one question is, where can I live for your intended purpose? That's what we want. That's what we want. You ought to live a holy and godly life as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming. In light of the person and place, I want to live a godly life. In keeping with this promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new home, a new earth, the home of righteousness. You were created for a person, Jesus. You were created for a place. So how do you know the person? Well, know the person, Jesus, through the Bible, reading the Bible. That's the best way. The Bible gives us who he is, falling in love with him. The Bible is the most sold, stolen, read book in the world, translated in 1,500 languages, 3 continents. I mean, think about that. 3 continents this thing was written on, yet it's just a smooth story. Begins in a garden with a marriage of Adam and Eve, and ends in a city with a marriage of the church and Jesus. It's just one story. It's just a story. We know him through the Word. We know him through prayer. That's how also God speaks to us through his Bible. We speak to him through prayer. I love the Lord because he hears my voice. When you pray, you are saying, Lord, I want to live and align my life. I can't do this on my own. What else do? You know the person and long for the place by inviting others to be fully satisfied in him. That's what you do. You invite others to be fully satisfied. So you're encouraging your friends. Hey, can I show you why I'm living for a person and a place? I mean, think about that. Step out. Will people not like that? Of course. They want to live for their own purpose. Will you look odd? Of course. You're inviting people to live for a person and a place. Will you get nicknames and people want to leave the room when you enter? Of course. Because you're coming against what they truly think is going to satisfy. Man, I want to applaud those in here going to Kaleo. Man, keep that commitment. That is a great place to learn the person and the place. I was sort of a Kaleo junkie, so I just kind of kept going back. They told me every time I went back, I had a 33% chance of finding my wife. It failed. Man, also, if there's someone that you're meeting with to help you grow, I would encourage you to do that. If you're in here and you're like, I don't have anybody to help me grow, man, find a Christ follower to help you grow. If you're in here and you're like, I've never made that decision, I don't even know what it looks like to live for the intended person of Christ, man, ask someone who brought you. Ask one of the staff. Start aligning your life with that purpose. Last verse, James 4:14. What is your life? It is a mist. It appears for a little while and then vanishes. A friend of mine called me up. He's like, hey, I got a question. I'm like, what? He's like, it's a random question. I'm like, what? He's like, how do you define the word mist? I'm like, have you been drinking? He's like, no. I'm like, why would you ask me that? He's like, how would you define mist? I'm like, mist? Here in the morning, gone in the afternoon. He's like, no, mist, here in the morning, gone in the morning. You don't even make it to lunch. Your life's a mist. Some of you are going to live to your 30s and 40s and 50s and 70s and maybe even 80s, 90s, who knows? But if you live to be 3,000 years old in light of eternity, this verse is still true. You're a mist. I'm at a coffee shop in Fayetteville. My friend Mark, haven't seen him for 2 years. He's like, Todd. I'm like, what's up, Mark? What you been doing? I don't know, chillaxing. Hey, man, I built a house. Cool. You want to come see it? Sure. Here's the address. Okay. A couple days later, swing by Mark's. Beautiful property. Shows me around the house. Takes me to his backyard. Like, Mark, like literally, like 20 steps off his porch was a wrought iron fence, and on the other side of the fence was a graveyard. Like literally, I put my foot through his fence and kicked a tombstone, respectfully. I'm like, Mark! He's like, what? I'm like, you could have had any property in Fayetteville, and you back your house up next to a graveyard? How morbid are you? He's like, Todd, do you know how long a funeral takes? I said, no. He said, 20 minutes. He said, do you know the number one thing that determines how many people come to your funeral? I said, no. He says, the weather. He says, every morning my wife and I are having coffee, and we watch him dig a hole. It's perfect for us to remember this is not what we were created for. See, Mark understands that he's a mist, but he also knows that the mist who's living for the person Jesus and longing and looking forward to the new heavens and new earth, that the mist now has meaning. Thank you.